Play has this incredible power to drive progress. Parkour is basically motivated by play. It's motivated by the desire to take on challenges. The only justification that we have that we are real is that we experience consciousness.
Welcome to the Strength Connection podcast, a show to share stories, insights, and experiences in strength, physically, mentally, and spiritually. I'm Michael Kurkowski, host of the Strength Connection, and I'm so grateful that you can join me today. So in these episodes, I connect with some of the most inspiring and successful individuals to chop it up and learn from true life experiences that have helped them become who they are, the strongest versions of themselves. One of the greatest ways I've always learned the most important lessons is through stories. We all have them, and they make us who we are. So let's dive in. Here we go. Today, I'm joined by Rafe Kelley, a pioneer in the worlds of parkour and natural movement, and the founder of Evolve Move Play. So after an upbringing in the worlds of martial arts and gymnastics, Rafe found a new calling in the world of parkour, starting the first West Coast gym centered around this training, which eventually led to him connecting deeper with the natural world and created Evolve Move Play. It's a program that is the true definition of strength connection. So Rafe is one of the brightest minds in movement, recently being guests on Jordan Peterson's and John Vervaeke's shows, two of the most influential podcasts on the planet. And it was a true honor to share the mic with him. So with that, we'll get right to it. But before we do, please show the support for the show. Make sure you subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you're listening, and also on our YouTube channel, The Strength Connection. Your support means everything to me, and I sincerely appreciate you. Thanks so much. Let's get on with the show. All right, let's have some fun. Rafe Kelley, it's an honor to meet you. Thanks so much for taking the time, man.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Sounds like you guys had a pretty playful 4th of July.
We did.
Before we were recording this.
Yeah. They basically we live on a quiet cul-de-sac with a bunch of other young families, and one of the families hosted a party. And so from, 1 o'clock to 7, almost 8, the kids were just running around like, crazy, having water balloon fights and water gun fights and just getting totally soaked, which was great. And then, they were riding their bikes around the cul-de-sac. And then afterwards we finished the movie Footloose, which we just started. And
the original one or the newer one?
The original one, yeah.
Okay, there you go.
None of this newfangled stuff.
Right, yeah.
And so we have this little grassy sward in our front yard, and then this maple tree that this Japanese maple tree the kids love to do parkour in. So they made me take them out and put on the Footloose soundtrack, and they had this crazy dance party where my son, who's just about to turn 9, did a backflip in the middle of his dance for the first time. He's been working on backflips. I mean, he learned a backflip on the trampoline when he was 5, I think, or 6. When he was 6, and then he started working on standing backflips on the ground. Probably, I think, back in March, but with mats and in a gym.
Yeah.
And
decided to go for it. He was just in the zone.
And he lands on his hands and his knees, but pops back up and does it again. And I was just like, that was really cool. So power of play. And then they were incorporating all these tree routes, swinging and vaulting and doing brachiations in between the trees, and then popping down and then doing breakdancing moves. It was pretty epic. It was
that's definitely a light bulb moment when you hit something you've been working on for a while as a kid, specifically something with no kind of extra padding or anything like that. Just, all right, I'm feeling it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I've seen that in my son. Like, I think when he learned his Kong vault, he also learned it while dancing. So I was trying to teach it to him, but he was kind of struggling to understand, how to keep his legs in between his arms. And he was getting in his head about it, and he was upset about not getting it right. And then, like, we just put on music, and he had a dance party, and I had this little, like, bench in the middle of the floor, it was a weight bench. It's like for bench pressing. Okay. But just the bench, not the uprights. And I've used that to teach them vaulting skills. And so we just had that, and then he was dancing through the room, and he would just like vault every once in a while when it made sense in the middle of his dance. And then all of a sudden he just got it. So there's something really interesting of the power of like that deep play state, and music to sort of unlock skills, at least for him in particular.
That's interesting. Like, what is it? It's like, is it just a deep sense of flow state at the moment? And that just kind of maybe opens up a little different inhibition, or just kind of, I wouldn't say it's like taking away the fear, but it's almost just like you're just you're in your body so much at that time that you probably have almost like a little bit more of like an invincible feel, like, all right, I'm going to try something.
Yeah. I think that is precisely it. I think, basically you're kind of just a very different creature when you have the right neurochemicals flowing through you, right? Mm-hmm. You kind of become invincible to some degree. I mean, not invincible, but you become much more robust and much more reactive and much more attuned to the motor control parameters. Mm-hmm. When, you're running enough norepinephrine and dopamine and, internal cannabinoids and internal opioid systems, all that stuff, like you get the dial it just right. And, you'll see people just occupy a very different experience of their body than they do otherwise. And dance and music have really interesting power to unlock things like that, to take people into this really ecstatic flow state.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's that different level of play. It's so interesting you said that. It's like we can learn so much from the kids in our lives, right? It seems like as adults we kind of lose that sense a little bit. And just kind of, it's interesting, like being in preparing for this, like yesterday I just went out for a nice hike after the afternoon, and just being out in nature. I was thinking about our conversation and following a lot of the work that you've done with parkour since Parkour Visions, going into Evolve Move Play. And I get outside, quite a bit. I love training outside, but it was also like just going through like a hike, just start naturally like jumping from one rock to another and kind of just like using your hands. I left there and just my entire mood for the rest of the day just changed. I was such in a calm state, such a, like just a different type of just mindset that you get. And body feels good too, but it's something about just using your body in all different ways. And I think that's where I've seen so much, like in the fitness industry, we get so much into like the structure of everything, when I think one of the things we've lost a little bit is just that essence of just play, just moving around with our bodies, not in a structured way as much, but in a little bit more of that creative way.
Yeah, play has this incredible power to drive progress. And this is, I think, my interest in play certainly catalyzed by discovering parkour and starting to train parkour, because I came from gymnastics, right? I was a gymnastics teacher. I was not a highly accomplished gymnast myself. I didn't start gymnastics until I was 15, but I had a way with kids.
Did you do anything before then? Like
martial arts.
Martial arts.
So I had a extended martial arts background as a child, and I played soccer. And I actually even started lifting weights when I was 12. But just bodybuilding circuits and very what's the word?
Like the splits.
Yeah, just like walking around and doing, bicep curls on a machine. Yeah. But I just didn't care. Like I had a mentor who took me there, and I would do the things with him, but I had zero like real motivational drive at that point. I wasn't like in there with intense concentration on my mind muscle, and trying to like rack the weights up higher every time. I was just kind of like goofing off on these machines. But yeah, I'd done a few things. But yeah, so at 15, I started training gymnastics. At the time, I was already 6'1", and I weighed about 150 pounds. And I'm currently, I'm about 215 right now.
Okay. So lean and mean.
So I'm a big man. Yeah. And my body structure was, I weighed 205 when I graduated high school. So between 15 and 18, my body filled out a lot.
Yeah.
So at 15, I was really excited about gymnastics. That was right after the 1996 Olympics. So that got me excited. My little sister was in gymnastics, so we started training there, and my older brother got into it. My older brother is 5'7", and he was like 130 pounds.
That's a perfect gymnastics body right there.
He was, he's fully developed. He's 19 at the time. He's been doing jiu-jitsu for a couple of years, like super ripped and lean and powerful. And he was doing double backflips on the trampoline like 6 weeks later, and standing backflips and muscle ups on rings, and it took me years to get all that stuff right.
Yeah.
But in an event, I liked it, and I had started working with kids independently, like doing boys and girls club type stuff, and so I got hired as a gymnastics coach. Okay. So I got really into it, and I actually quit university where I was studying anthropology, because I found that I just really loved coaching. Coaching was really, really rewarding to me, and I saw that as my path forward in the world. And so I'd absorbed a lot of sort of pedagogy from gymnastics by the time that I came over into parkour. And what's fascinating about parkour is, in a lot of ways, it's quite similar to gymnastics. Like it's basically moving your body around on obstacles, and you can think of the balance beam and the vault bar, the vault, the rings, the parallel bars, the uneven bars, the high bar. They're all just like species of obstacles. And then, the acrobatic portion of parkour is obviously, there's a lot of common ground. Like backflip's a backflip, a front flip's a front flip, front handspring's a front handspring, double back, double front, right? There's a lot of common language. I was also interested in track and field, so I didn't ever really compete in track and field, but I paid attention to it, and I read up on track stuff, and so I kind of had a sense of how parkour athletes compared to these other two sports that share a lot of common ground. And what I noticed over time was that we were clearly just not nearly on the same level as gymnastics when I started in 2005, and we were all just super amateurish, right? But
in regards to skill level, or
in regards to skill level,
okay.
Yeah. But by the time we had built the gym, and around the time that I was exiting the gym, like some of the best parkour athletes were now really starting to push skills that were comparable to the best gymnasts. So one of the athletes that I trained, his name's Nate Weston. He was one of the first one or two guys to do a triple backflip off of a bar outside.
Wow.
So a triple backflip, I believe, is rated D in the men's code of points in gymnastics, which is the second highest rated skill.
Okay.
But there's almost no athletes who compete E level dismounts in gymnastics. So this is basically like comparable to the highest level of gymnastics. Now Nate was a very good gymnast at one point. He was like, a level 9, which is a very high level gymnast for an 11-year-old or 12-year-old at the time. I can't remember how old he was, but so he did have some gymnastics background. But I had other athletes who I knew, like this kid Jared Nahulu, who just came completely from parkour. And a couple of years later, I think around 2016, I think he was the first person I knew of to do a double twisting, double back flip off of a bar. And that was, this is not a gymnastics bar. It's a hard metal bar, right? In a bar setup that's not set up just like a high bar.
Yeah.
And he did it and landed on 3/4 inch rubber matting over concrete. So, I mean, that's a D skill being competed in parkour in circumstances that are much more challenging than
different environment.
Yeah. Than you're seeing in gymnastics. So you see that, now the best acrobatic specialists in parkour, they can flip as many times in the air, they can spin as many times in the air broadly as gymnasts can, or at least very comparable, 90%, which is pretty astonishing. And at the same time, if you look at like pure jumping power, interestingly, parkour athletes are not particularly fast, like as far as running speed. I think mostly because we just never approach max velocity in our training. You rarely do run-ups that are more than like 7 steps. Okay. So, we're running from maybe at most 10 yards away, right? Whereas like a world-class long jumper is running from 60 yards, 60 meters. And so I don't think there's a lot of parkour athletes who are pushing down into like, sub 11 second 100 meter times, even sub 12 second 100 meter times.
So what's the differentiation then, like with the top like is there a specific skill that it seems like parkour takes more than like somebody said, like it's not like ultimately fast, but is it more like balance, like dexterity?
Yeah, I mean, it's coordination. It's a lot of different things, right? Upper body pulling power is really important in parkour. Parkour athletes often can go over and do really crazy dynos if they, have enough of a grip in rock climbing. So like one of my contacts, Toby Seeger, is now he's kind of transferred from the parkour community to now he's also dabbling quite a bit in rock climbing. So he's in both, but I think he's climbing 8B in the rock climbing world, which is like, that's professional level. It's high professional level.
Yeah.
He's setting world records in dynos. So there's a lot of like upper body pulling power is very important in parkour, and jumping power. So this is what I was going to say is I think for a standing jump, like for a standing broad jump ability, I think that the best parkour athletes now are actually, or like not even the best parkour athletes, but if you compare like a comparably experienced group of parkour athletes to track and field or gymnastics athletes, the parkour athletes have more standing jumping ability.
Okay.
And I think that if you're looking at like a 3-step run up, you'd see a fairly comparable skill in horizontal jumping ability between that. It's as you get past 3 steps, 4 steps, 5 steps, 6 steps, that the track athletes are just much better able to coordinate. First of all, they're just faster. They have way more reserves of speed, but they're also able to handle this speed going into a jump. Like it's a huge technical problem to go 20 miles an hour and jump off the ground.
Right. Yeah.
Like a really specific set of adaptations. But if we isolate jumping power down and separate it from speed and speed management, I think that you're seeing now that the best parkour athletes are comparable to, if not advanced beyond the level of track and field athletes.
Yeah, so that's so interesting, because the ones that I've seen that, like you see the top guys, like it's almost it's a very awe-inspiring thing to see, kind of similar with gymnastics. Like you see the top level gymnasts, it feels different than seeing top level NFL players. It's great, it's athletic, but to see them do those skills in gymnastics or parkour, you're almost like this quizzical look. And in parkour, it's not as much like the skill or the stunt that they're doing, but the ability to move directly into another stunt and another skill right afterwards and maintain that balance and to maintain that. Yeah, exactly. That connectability. That's a beautiful word.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was I'm not sure how much is true in the current code of points in gymnastics. I don't pay nearly as much attention to gymnastics as I did in the past. But I think right around the 2000 Olympics, they did a really strong connection bonus thing because they wanted to see athletes putting together really complicated passes. So it used to be you're just trying to get that. You have in a gymnastics routine, you have so many skills that are counted, right? So you can't just spam the same skill over and over again and just like get more points for it, right? So you're going to have, say, I don't remember what the actual number it is, but let's just arbitrarily say 10 skills that are going to be counted. So now you're going to try to get all those skills to be as high in the code of points as possible. So if there's a few enough skills, then what you end up doing is sort of like building your tumbling and pass to achieve one really, really big skill. So because of that, they then put in these connection bonuses so you could rack up points by doing like 4 skills or 3 skills that are difficult and complex, but not as difficult and complex as the highest skill. So instead of somebody doing round off, back handspring, triple backflip, you'd see people doing, a round off, backflip, 1.5 twist, step out, front twisting, triple twist, right? And now the connection bonus is higher. So it's the same in parkour. There are athletes who specialize in, basically the one big trick. So Dom Tommaso is probably the best in the world at just sort of doing some insanely huge thing, right? He'll do, especially front flips. He's done, I think his biggest front flip down was like 27 feet that he went down. He's probably done 15-foot, like gaps between things or more, with a front flip. Big gainers, gainer precision, stuff like that. But he doesn't twist very much, doesn't have remarkable twisting ability, doesn't really connect skills particularly. Whereas if you look at another athlete like Travis Verkey, Verkey is extraordinary at putting together lines where he's connecting extremely complicated skills to extremely complicated skills.
Yeah.
So
it's like home run hitters versus like you're consistently hitting doubles over and over again.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But that ability to do that is definitely, like, it's extremely challenging to orient from doing a double corkscrew, which is a backflip off of one leg, that's slanted in the air. So your leg slot is almost horizontal. Yeah. I think technically for a corkscrew, the leg sling is supposed to be slightly above horizontal, but that gets into weird areas of terminology and in parkour that your fitness audience is not going to care about at all or understand. But anyways, yeah. So you do this double corkscrew and then land on the edge of something, step out, and then do a different flip. So that's the type of stuff. Elis Torhall is another guy, who's putting together these multi-flipping lines where he's, maybe doing a flip with a full twist or double flip, catching a bar, going into another skill immediately. It's absolutely astonishing. Yeah, for sure.
So for you, like, you started in gymnastics at 15 and then really kind of caught the coaching bug. You really wanted to work with people and help in that. And then at 23, you found parkour. What was it about parkour that felt different or that you aligned with more in that? Because you said there's some similar skills of it, but was it a different joy that you found in it, or kind of a different fulfillment from doing that modality?
I mean, I think I was attracted to the sense that, like, being able to do these skills is somehow heroic, right? It's like this big confrontation, at least with the challenging yourself. I remember, watching the 1996 Olympics, and when Carrie Strug like sprained her ankle and got up and ran down the runway and landed on one leg. Like, that was very, like, aspirational for me, right?
Oh yeah.
Knowing the whole context.
I haven't thought about that in forever, and now it just flashed right back into my head.
Yeah, it was quite the moment. Knowing the whole context, I'm not sure that was that great of a moment, but for whatever reason, that motivated me. And then in the same way, when I saw parkour and I saw David Bell, like, jumping between buildings, it was as if someone had sort of said, like, hey, you could still be a heroic knight out there, taking on dragons. It's just like the dragons are in you, trying to confront this building, right? Gap. And there was a way in which I felt like parkour was just like, it had everything that I liked about gymnastics, but was more real. It was like discovering the platonic form that gymnastics was the shadow cast on the wall of.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Huh.
And so I still feel like that. I still feel like gymnastics is just a distorted version of parkour.
Oh, really? Okay. Do you think do you think it's maybe because of, like, that structure versus almost like creativity? It seems like parkour, there's a little bit more of a creative flow to it, where, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of structures you built, an EMP, and I want to go over that in a little bit, but it also seems like there's such this element of freeness to it, where it's like you're going from one thing to another. I'm sure gymnastics has some of that, but still you're kind of like, you have a very specific routine that you're doing, you're following, like, kind of step by step, where it seems like your mind can open up a little bit more in something like parkour.
So, I mean, this is kind of the point that I was trying to get to in making the comparison that parkour athletes now are in many ways comparable to the best track and gymnastics and athletes. And now you can see even in rock climbing, like this is the relative attainment of skill is very comparable. which is really astonishing because almost all the top parkour athletes in the world, now it's changing a little bit, but up until recently, most of these guys are self-taught. They don't have, $1 million facilities that have, the same type of support that a gymnast has. They're not training the same many degree of hours, right? Like there's very, very few people to almost nobody who's ever trained 40 plus hours of parkour a week, right? But that's, that's what it takes to be an elite gymnast. So the fact that these street rat kids are basically achieving the same level of skill is really astonishing. And what I attribute it to is that parkour is basically motivated by play. It's motivated by the desire to take on challenges. And once you kind of get it, right? Once you understand what you're doing as a parkour athlete and get the feel for it, you're creating these very tight feedback loops where you get to choose challenges that, your internal sense of what an appropriate challenge is what's guiding you. And there's innumerable sets of challenges that are available to you, and you can really tightly couple the level of challenge to your particular level of or where you're at in your developmental cycle. And it's very much driven by the athlete. This is extremely high athlete autonomy and agency. And it results in lots of experiences of the flow state. And I think this is what results in extremely accelerated motor learning. And I think that gymnastics, because it's more of a routinized cookie cutter skill, everybody's learning the same thing at the same time, you're highly technical. It actually inhibits a lot of the intrinsic drive towards sort of, basically parkour is just a better example of constraint-led or ecological dynamics playing out in the development of human locomotion.
It sounds very like it's almost like just a natural evolution of learning. I mean, that's how we learn, right? As kids, it's like you're a little bit, you challenge a little bit ahead of you, and then you learn it, and then you find your next challenge, and then you find your next challenge. And it's funny, as I mentioned this before we started recording, it seems like we understand that as kids, or like that kids need to do that in play. In our culture, I don't know how much it is anymore. Now it's like, that's a debate a lot from a lot of different people if kids need to play more. And I understand that. But I think even as adults, it's like, it seems like we get away from that like aspect of learning a bit as well, of like kind of pushing just a little bit above. And this just seems like it's such a beautiful natural evolution of almost a choose your own adventure sense of it within a dynamic structure.
Yeah. So I started getting into the play research, and then my wife actually did her master's thesis in anthropology on parkour as a form of adult play. And, so once you read the play research, you see that essentially most animals engage in both exploratory locomotor play and rough and tumble play. And then primates and bears and a few other things like to do like object-oriented play, where they'll just mess around with something, raccoons. But obviously it's super important in human beings who go on to be tool users. So within the play research, to talk about, exploratory locomotor play, object-oriented play, and rough and tumble play. And then with human beings, you have narrative play and pretend play and all that kind of stuff. But as far as just the physical ways in which we play, one of them is, how can I move my body through the space? So I'm going to run, I'm going to jump, I'm going to climb, swim, I'm going to balance, I'm going to climb high things, right? And every kid does this, right? And essentially, this is all that parkour is. Parkour is just exploratory locomotor play. And gymnastics is basically exploratory locomotor, gymnastics is locomotion, right? So it's an expression of this, and it's fun and intrinsically motivating to some degree as well, but it's highly arbitrary in the shapes and the ways that you want to move your body, and it's very divorced from the world that we experience around us. So the shapes of a gymnastics apparatus, like a pommel horse, unless you actually ride horses,
right?
which that's where it comes from, right? The pommel horse developed as a way to drill skills that you use on actual horseback.
Right. I heard, didn't like, I think it was like the Comanches or something would do like almost pommel horse exercises when they were about going into bow and arrows, back in like the days in Oklahoma.
Yeah. I mean, lots of horse riding cultures have developed systems of horse acrobatics, right? They're, basically just ways of cultivating skillfulness and comfort on top of a horse. So you can go to a cirque right now and see like Cavalier and watch them do, circles and, all sorts of skills and hand balancing on there and standing on the pommels and everything. And those were skills of cavalry, right? That's what it comes from. So, you can imagine if you're a soldier, you might need to climb a wall to ingress into an enemy area or something like that, or to escape something, to get away from something. So, like the rings and the bars, like those just developed as strengthening mechanisms for soldiers. That's what they were originally. Gymnastics comes from the Greek word gymnasia, which literally just refers to being naked, because the Greeks trained in the nude. And so you used to have these gymnasia, which were, open air areas where young men in most of the Greek city-states and young men and women in Sparta would get together and run and jump and practice martial arts and throw things, right? Throw the discus, throw the javelin. So that's where gymnastics started. And then when the Greeks were sort of rediscovered during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, people wanted to sort of return to some of the things that they did. So the movement towards gymnastics comes out of that period of time. So early on, like so you had tumbling, right? And you can go back and look at, tumbling would be somersaults, front handsprings, flips on the ground. And if you look at like medieval physical culture, you see that knights, right? Men at arms trained to be able to tumble in armor sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. So if you were a well-trained soldier, a medieval knight, you could probably turn a handspring, probably turn a front flip. Right. That was part of the training. You were going to wrestle, you were going to do acrobatics, you were going to run.
Yep.
And so that's where this stuff originates from. But as it kind of got codified into this set of apparatus, the reason that you train these skills became further and further removed from what they came from.
Right.
So take the vault, right? So if you're a competitive gymnast today, you're going to do something like a front handspring with 2 flips out of it, right? Or a round off, basically round off onto the board and then flip a couple times or twist a couple times off the vault. This is pretty far removed from any kind of vault that you would use functionally.
Right.
Now, when I was learning to teach gymnastics, we were just kind of still teaching to do like tuck vaults onto things, which is essentially a Kong vault. It's the same as a Kong vault in parkour, flanked vaults and pike vaults. And all these things have gone away because they're not particularly developmental for the skills that they actually use at the highest levels of gymnastics, but what they are is actually functional. And so if you go back to the 1996 Olympics and you watch the compulsory rounds of the men's vault, you'll see that they competed something called a Hecht vault, which is a Kong vault, what we would call a Kong vault in parkour, which is basically diving onto your hands and having your body pass behind your hands as you go over the object. So in its functional application, your body's going to tuck up and come down on the other side. The Hecht vault is a more advanced technical version of this, where you actually have to keep your body straight. So you have to bounce off your hands hard enough that you can keep your body totally straight and fly through the air and come down on the other side. So they were competing this, and they were judged in part for how far that they flew past the vault. So it's actually very much like parkour, right?
Okay. Yep.
But going into the next code of points, like the developmental manuals dropped all of those things, but they'd been there since the beginning of gymnastics in this, I think, 17th century with Ludwig Jahn and those guys. So what we do in parkour is actually a reflection of what gymnastics was at its origins. But gymnastics has become extremely aesthetically driven. The competitive format has sort of lost its connection to what the purpose of it was to develop in an athlete.
So it seems like gymnastics, it started, as you said, like there's some intrinsic, motivation behind that, probably because you can see the carryover into how this is going to function into maybe real world stuff. So
I think gymnastics derives from tumbling traditions and strength training traditions that were clearly like related to relevant attributes for actual like soldiers, basically. Now, because it's soldiers, and because this is also arising during the Industrial Revolution, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I suspect that German gymnastics is probably related also to the rise of the Prussian state. And the Prussians, of course, are famous for developing this extremely systematic, mechanized approaches to troop training. That's also where our modern education system comes from. So gymnastics is actually very deeply kind of built around a mechanical, like factory kind of approach to manufacturing human movement capacity.
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas I don't think that human beings don't optimally develop that way, right? Human nature is there's a really important idea in like thinking about problem solving, right? The difference between a complicated problem and a complex problem. So a complicated problem is a problem that no matter how many moving pieces it has a single derivable solution. So it has an algorithmic solution. Complex problems are what's called combinatorially explosive. So building a rocket ship is very complicated, but it's basically, once
all paths lead to Rome.
Yeah. There's not a lot of degrees of freedom.
Sure.
You just have to you have to do it right?
Right.
Very few tolerances. But playing chess is a complex problem because it's actually combinatorially explosive. So if you look at a game of chess, there's something like an average of 30 legal moves per turn and an average of 64 moves in a game, which means that the average game contains 30 to the 64 potential pathways. So that's a really big number.
Yeah.
To give people an idea of how big a number that is, it's around the same order of magnitude as the number of electrons in the known universe.
Yeah.
Okay.
A little complex. Yeah.
So there's a problem that comes up in any number of things of what's called combinatorial explosion. So you can't algorithmically solve how to win a chess game, right? The biggest, most powerful computer that we have can't come close to doing that. So what you do is you have heuristics, right? So one heuristic in chess is control the center of the board, right? Or another heuristic might be get your queen out early. It's a bias for how you pay attention. And basically anything about human movement is a complex problem, not a complicated problem. So the optimal way to think about it is more like a gardener, less like an engineer.
That's such an eloquent way of putting it. I really haven't thought about it in that context before, but you see so much specifically with fitness programs and health programs are so much on the algorithmic side. Like you follow this plan and in 6 weeks you do this.
Yeah, it's a total myth.
Yeah, where we're not built to do that. We're not built to just step by step follow this, just like you're building a car and then eventually you get combustion and then you can go drive. Where we're very I thought of that before, like humans are complicated. Maybe we're more complex than we are complicated. Yeah, that's a really interesting distinction on that. And kind of seeing that, too, I've seen it in the world of strength, doing kettlebell training where, I've talked about it a lot on this podcast about the last few years of doing more of an intuitive approach to training, kind of having an idea of what you're going to do, but inside that idea, play with it. So there's a bunch of different variations of what the workout might be during the day. And it seems like it's so similar with the world of parkour, and kind of with that comparison with gymnastics, where it's like, where now it seems like you're learning a very complicated skill over and over again, but you just got to figure out how to do it. Where in parkour, it's like you can do it a bunch of different ways. You can go through the trees in a bunch of different spots, and you kind of have to be in a different mindset, it seems, in order to really embrace that.
Yeah, you have to recognize the problem of complexity, right? And that's ultimately what we're doing. So I guess. So I came from gymnastics, right? And then I got into CrossFit in the early days of CrossFit, 2005, 2006. Picked up Mark Ripito, started reading,
Starting Strength.
Text, practical programming. And then I read, Zatsiorsky, and, didn't make it through Verkhoshansky and Mel Sif, but I don't think most people do. I tried.
Well, shout out to my buddy Antonio. He translated all of Verkhoshansky's work, so at least it's a little bit easier to go. If I could ask you though, Rafe, like because you were in Parkour Visions for a while, and then you kind of found of going into Evolve Move Play, which it seems like that was more of being outside, being more in the natural environment. Was that really kind of the changeover of like, okay, now I'm going to transition from the gym and evolve the program into more of a different approach? Was kind of being outside and being more in the natural environment, was that a major part of that?
Yes. There was a number of things that went into it, but before I started parkour, I was training in gymnastics and on strength training and playing basketball. And then I would often go alpine hiking on the weekends because I just liked being in alpine areas. So when I started training parkour, like during the summer, there was always parkour jams on the weekends. I was always meeting with people, and we always met in the city. Mm-hmm. And I missed going out into the alpine area. So I wanted to just go be in nature. So I started thinking within a year of training parkour about like, what would it be like to train parkour in nature? But I couldn't really imagine it, right? The spaces that I ran around through as a kid, they didn't seem to have lots of setups for cat leaps and, Kong vaults and stuff that we did in parkour, or underbars, swings. And so I was not sure how to integrate these things. At the same time, I'd read a lot of ethnographic literature, and I had read about the way that kids played all around the world. And there was this recognition of the power of play and of, things that kids did in nature, jumping off of trees, climbing trees, swinging around on liana vines. There was something that was attractive to me about that. And I also read a lot of mythology, right? Irish myth, Norse myth, Greek myth. And often the heroes in these myths actually have descriptions of them doing some really interesting parkour-like stuff. And it's usually combined with, martial prowess, with being able to have skills with the sword and wrestle and fight. Yeah. So there's I'll give it a couple scenes. One scene is from the Irish myth, the pursuit of Dermot and Grania. So Dermot is, the Irish myths are extremely exaggerated and very, very unrealistic. So they're like Marvel movies. They're the Marvel movies of myth. So like Dermot regularly kills armies of like 50,000 people just himself. So
yeah.
So Dermot is the hero of this myth. He's one of this legendary band of Irish warriors called the Fianna. And basically Finn, who is the chief of the Fianna, he's becoming an old man, and he has lost his wife and he wants to remarry. So he wants to remarry the daughter of the king, Grania. And she meets him and she's like, no, I don't want to marry this old man. And so she casts a spell on Diarmid and says, you're going to take me out because I love you instead. And Diarmid is, is a loyal soldier of Finn, but he can't escape this love gauge that she puts on him. So he steals away with her. And then Finn and everybody else starts sending all these armies after him. So there's this army of mercenaries that's looking for Diarmid, but they don't know what he looks like. So Diarmid dresses up in a disguise and he meets up with them, and they're like, have you seen this guy Diarmid? And he's like, oh yeah, I saw him the other day. He's the most magnificent warrior you've ever seen. He did this feat I've never seen anyone do before. He rolled a barrel down a hill and stood on top of it all the way down the bottom of this rocky hill. And so then he gets up and he demonstrates the feat. And then everyone's like, well, I can do that. That's not a big deal. And so then 10,000 of their soldiers kill themselves trying to do this feat. All right. And then that's one day. And then the next day he comes back and meets them again. And they're like, oh, well, have you seen Diarmid? It's like, yeah, he did this thing where he ran up and stood on the point of a spear. And then 10,000 of their soldiers impale themselves on the spear. And then they're like, oh, and then, the next day it's like he jumped up and landed in between two sword blades. And then, they killed themselves doing that. But it's like precision jumping and running up blades and, being able to balance. It's like, it's all parkour. Right. And then Kuhula, the Irish hero, was famous for the feat of the salmon leap that would get him into castles and stuff like that. And then if you look at like the Norse sagas, they're much more realistic, but there's these amazing scenes where like in Null's saga, Skarpheden, one of the warriors, jumps across a river and lands on ice and slides across the ice. And while he's sliding, chops the top of somebody's head off with his sword. So there was this idea for me that parkour is like a hero's journey. You're confronting.
I was going to say, it's like a hero's journey.
Exactly. But it's an expression of these fundamental heroic skills that human beings have wanted to cultivate forever. But for me, it wasn't complete without having the martial arts as well. So early on in my parkour journey, I wanted to return to the martial arts. So I was lucky enough to find one of the first MMA gym in my town here, which was through the Straight Blast Gym affiliate system. So that's Matt Thornton's gym. That's Conor McGregor's coach's coach. And so I got pretty good education in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai through there. And I started wanting to kind of combine these elements. And around the same time, I discovered the work of Georges Hébert, who was the founder of Méthode Naturelle. And he was talking about the idea that there were 10 fundamental human movements that we all should be competent in: walking, running, jumping, climbing, moving on all fours, balancing, swimming, lifting, carrying, and self-defense. So the first 7 of those skills are locomotive skills. So back to the exploratory locomotor play idea, right? The next 2, lifting and throwing, that would be your manipulative. And then self-defense is interactive. So I wanted to kind of get back into and bring back the Méthode Naturelle. There was an idea that parkour in some sense may have also been inspired by Méthode Naturelle, that David Bell, who's the founder of parkour, that his dad may have been trained in Méthode Naturelle as a child soldier in Vietnam. And not in our Vietnam War, but in the previous Franco-Vietnamese War. So there was this curiosity about that from the early days for me. And then the play part came in through my business partner, Tyson Cheka, introduced me. Well, I was already interested in play, I think, through the anthropology, but I got a deeper dive into it through Frank Ferencich, who does something called The Exuberant Animal. And he wrote this beautiful book called The Exuberant Animal about the importance of play and play as a source of a physical culture and how physical culture could reflect play. And so he put all those elements together, and that was sort of where I was evolving. And I met this guy who called himself Hébertiste on the parkour forums, who was also interested in the revival of Méthode Naturelle. And he was French and spoke French and could go find old Hébert books, right? So I went to France to train with him and to learn from him and to look at the books with him. And that's Erwin LaCour, who went on to found MoveNet.
That's how I learned about all this, when he connected with Gray Cook and FMS, who I was big with, and they did a lot of work, with MoveNet and understanding it.
Yeah. So basically in 2008, 2009, I was teaching parkour. In 2008, I was teaching parkour here in Bellingham, but I was struggling to I was teaching méthode naturelle and parkour in Bellingham, but I was struggling to get enough students. It was still, so early in it, and it was a smaller town. So then I got an offer to go teach in Seattle. And there was a CrossFit gym that wanted to have us teach parkour down there. Mm-hmm. And so we had started a nonprofit parkour organization. And so I went down there. So I went and kicked off that program and started teaching. And, everyone wanted me to kind of be the head coach of the parkour community because of my background in teaching gymnastics. And my passion for learning about all this stuff. But actually, I kicked that program off in September. And then at the end of that month, I went to Corsica to film the video that became the workout the world forgot. So it was Tyson's friend, Tim, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure I remember his name even at this point. I haven't talked to him. Tim Zane, I think was his name. Mm-hmm. But Tyson hooked us up with Tim, and Tim was the film guy. And then that video was going to feature Erwin and I training together. Mm-hmm. And for various reasons, that kind of fell off. So then I was still sort of talking to Erwin about potentially collaborating with him through early 2009. And actually in early 2008, I forgot about that. Erwin came out here and we taught the first MoveNet seminar that I know of to the public at the Sunray Shire, where we host Return to the Source. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then, Erwin and I didn't really see eye to eye. He didn't really understand the play portion of it. And I didn't really like the direction he was taking it once it went away from being a resurrection of méthode naturelle and became MoveNet. It felt very commercialized and very mechanical. Mm-hmm. So off I went. But at that point, one of my critiques after the first event that we taught was I just didn't feel like either of us were that experienced at the core elements we were teaching. I wanted to get better at parkour. I wanted to get better at martial arts. I wanted to get better at all these things. And I felt like we were both at kind of a novice level still across a lot of these areas, and that wasn't satisfying to me. So that's why I ended up focusing from 2009 to 2013 on parkour, because I figured that if I could, approach mastery in this one discipline, it would give me the insights that I needed to then fill out the rest of it. That was actually an idea that I got from Scott Sonnet from RMAX. He's the guy who popularized the club bell. Okay. But he said something like, if you want to become the master of every tool, start by mastering one tool. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, parkour is going to be the one tool that I'm going to master. Yeah. And so I did that for I guess 4 years, and we were able to create an organization that had pedagogical principles that were I think widely viewed as the kind of the leading edge of pedagogy at that point throughout the world. We started some of the first grassroots parkour competitions. We brought in we created the first teaching summits for parkour. And but then I was always wanting to get back to nature. I was always wanting to bring the martial arts into what we were doing. I was always wanting to create a more complete, holistic movement. And at a certain point, my co-founder Tyson was just not necessarily on the same page with me on that. And then as we brought in more staff, a lot of the staff were coming in with a very different understanding of parkour, and it was, just wasn't a fit. So I stepped away and started Evolve Move Play.
That's interesting. It's like such an evolution of what mastery really is, right? It's like I always reference Robert Greene's version of mastery, where you have the apprenticeship phase, then eventually you need to go to that creative active phase where you go in and you dive deep into the information and gaining the knowledge so much, and how you turn that eventually into wisdom is you need to go and creatively explore it. And what better way to go and explore it is to be out in nature and just actually explore it from that. And there's only so much you can really do within four walls. And when you get out and you can just explore and really just be for lack of a cliche, unified and like, one with the world, out there. It really is such a different feeling, of just
Absolutely.
being out in the elements and being able to have, because you equip yourself with this information that to do, but then it's like, okay, it's a new course. It's a new area. All right, let's see what this area has to explore.
Yeah. I mean, I, when I moved to Seattle, I suffered really intense seasonal depression, and I started working with a therapist, and she were just talking through the things that really like gave me joy and what was going on with me. We realized that like I really was craving nature. Like I just needed to spend time in nature. So we started trying to like figure out how we're going to do that. And I actually at that time lived next to Green Lake Park in Seattle, which had these really beautiful cedar trees. So I started just going down there to practice. And so I had been training predominantly in the parkour gym that we had created, and then to a lesser degree outside in a couple of our main urban spots. And when I started going there, I just discovered that I had this intense joy. And then I got really curious about why these trees were so good to move in. And then somebody tipped me off to there being like more trees like that were even bigger and better at Volunteer Park. And when I showed up there, I remember it was surreal. It was like a dream to walk through the park and see these trees and just be like, wow.
It's hard to describe, right? Yeah. It's like that feeling.
So I think in 2010, I started training predominantly in the trees. And so I'd gone really deeply into training in nature here in Bellingham at Whatcom Falls and Clayton Beach, which are, basically Whatcom Falls is a creek that has these huge sandstone boulders on it that are really good to move around on. And then Clayton Beach is sandstone boulders as well, but on a beach where it's carved by the sound, right? Yeah. And so between those two places, those were my main nature training places here in Whatcom County. And so then when I moved down there and I found the trees, that just like took me into a totally different journey with understanding natural movement and being able to really bring a lot of the parkour movement elements into relationship with the natural world. And so then when I left Parkour Visions in spring of 2013, and I, over that summer, I created the Evolve New Play brand, got myself a website, and by September, I had my first gigs teaching in Philadelphia and San Francisco. And so I got to go and like scout for and look for unique, amazingly beautiful natural spaces in those cities, take people out, explore, show them how they could use the spaces that we were in. And then I got to, start doing that, traveling all over the world. Funny part of that story that I didn't mention is, so I think in 2011, I met Ido Portal and started getting influenced by his ideas as well. So I was deep interest in evolutionary thinking, right? Evolution. And I came from parkour, but then I discovered Ido Portal. So that's move, right? And then deeply influenced by Frank Ferencic, play, evolve, move, play, right? So we evolved to move, we evolved to learn movement through play. That was the fundamental thesis. So I started talking about all my ideas around natural movement with Ido. Not so much the first time that I met and trained with him, but the second time I went to train with him in January of 2012 at a place called the Monkey Vault, Toronto, which is a parkour gym. And I was staying with the host, the guy who owned the gym. And so we would spend, the mornings together having coffee and training and then do the seminar. So I got a lot of time to talk to Ido, and he basically told me that I needed to follow in his footsteps. He was like, your ideas around natural movement are really important. It needs to get outside of the scope of this gym. So that was very encouraging, right? And then, Ido was still not super well known at that stage. He still kind of stays a little under the radar. He's definitely the most well-known guy in the movement community for a while there. He's kind of backed off. I think that level of fame was not really happy for him. Yeah. But in any event, so directly after that, so that was in January, I think. And then I think in February, we hosted Kelly Starrett for a movement and mobility seminar at Parkour Visions. And he told me like, hey, go on the road, teach seminars. So when as it became clear that like the vision wasn't aligned at Parkour Visions, I had kind of received the message from two of the top guys in the industry, like, hey, this is the next step on your journey. So go do it. So boom, off I went.
Yeah. So now, now you do these retreats. I think you do like 3 a year or so, I believe.
Yeah, we have 3 retreats. Yeah. And so we have retreats and workshops. So we actually started with workshops, which were the 2-day events that we travel and teach in other cities. And then we had one retreat. We've had one retreat from the beginning. The first retreat that we did was our July retreat, which is called Return to the Source. And that one was originally conceived when I was still at Parkour Visions. And the first group of students mostly came from Parkour Visions. So we basically, I just wanted to take people out into nature to do parkour. That was it. And I was like, well, we can camp at my dad's house and I can take people to Whatcom and Clayton Beach. So we can do a weekend where we'll do volunteer park in Seattle on the first day, and then Whatcom and Clayton Beach. And it was really well received. And I left Parkour Visions and started Evolve Move Play. I actually hadn't named Evolve Move Play, I think, yet when we had the first Return to the Source, but the ideas were all there and ready. And so I approached everyone who had signed up and said, hey, do you mind if we like expand the scope from a parkour nature event to this broader, holistic natural movement event? And everyone said yes. So that was our first teaching of it. So this is, that was 2013. So this is our 10-year anniversary this year.
Amazing. Yeah. And it's interesting. A lot of the reviews that I've heard from and people who have gone through it have called it one of the most transformative things. And it's every time I hear that, I was like, okay, like what do they mean by that? Like the depth of that. And I could see it in a bunch of different ways, but who essentially has been coming to the retreats? Has it been a lot of people who have already explored kind of this type of movement, or is it, people who are brand new, like have really not done this at all? Like, is it kind of a mixed bag?
It's a mixed bag, and it's changed over the years. I mean, the first year was almost exclusively people who came from the parkour community. And then the second year, we started to get people from the parkour community, from Ido Portal's sort of student base, and from the Wilderness Awareness School. And then that sort of continued, I guess, over the years. But then we started to attract just more people who are generally people from maybe the fitness industry, from different streams of the fitness industry. And then since my work has started to really dive into the philosophical aspect and be interacting with the work of Jordan Peterson and John Vervaeke, now we have a lot of people who come to me through those two thinkers. And so they may not have any movement background at all and just be like, okay,
they understand.
John or Jordan started making me think about meaning in life. I saw something with you, Rafe, and I realized that I need to get my body moving in order to experience that. And I want to come out and do that. So we get a mix, and we also have like a really strong year-over-year retention. So, we have 24 students in this event coming up, and I think half of them are returning students.
Wow.
And so that's, so some of those students now have been with us for, I think Melissa is going to be going, I think this is going to be her 8th retreat that she's come to with us. And so, so it's, so we also have this like culture that's passed down. Yeah. So the transformative aspect is interesting because I don't know that I set out to do that. I mostly
nobody who accomplishes that usually does seek that out. It usually just comes.
I mostly just like, I get so much joy out of doing these practices, and I wanted to create people who could do them with me. That's basically the main motivation, is like, there aren't that many people within the parkour community who really understand what nature offers. And there's not that many who can also do martial arts, or who understand like maybe a wider movement culture perspective on movement, right? And that there's little pieces from movement culture that are really nice to plug into your overall practice. So it was like, basically, I guess my motivation was just to create the type of training partners that I wanted to have around. And so I put on this event, and I'm really excited about the jumps that we're doing and the swings through the trees and everything. And I'm asking, and I'm like, okay, well, what did you like about the event? Tell me about the event. Tell me what you got out of it. Now it's like, oh, it was the most life-changing event. And they're like, the people, the connection I made with the people is the most important part. And I was like, oh, I don't care shit about people. But you get the same feedback or year over year, and people pay a lot of money to come train with you. You kind of want to make sure that they get the experience that they want to have. And so we start leaning into this, and then interesting things just happen at the events that don't have anything to do with, really, right? Like in 2016, we just happened to have 3 people who played music. 2 of them come from the capoeira community. So I had Lyme disease. I actually had to leave the property and leave my students in charge, a couple of my senior students, that night because I was so sick with Lyme disease. But the night that I left, Israel and Paul and Giancarlo led like a song circle. And when I came back, it was like the bond that had been created between everyone who was there was so much more powerful. And it's like, okay, well, music now becomes something that we need to attend to as part of what's happening at these events.
Yeah.
And, my dad just happens to have a sauna on the property. And it's like, so we take a sauna every night and we sing in the sauna and we jump in the cold. And it's like, okay, this is something powerful is happening here, right? And you sit around a campfire and you're under the stars. It's like, okay, that's powerful, it turns out. Mm-hmm. And so over the years, you just start like diving into that. And then as I became really interested in just the question of meaning and how a movement practice contributes to meaning in life, then you start incorporating aspects of storytelling, aspects of like really intentionally building a tribe. And you notice that something just like the food that we eat really makes a big difference, like having local food, like food that's grown in the valley that we're in, and then having people contribute to making the food and be part of the process. All of this brings people together in a sense of tribe. So like over the years, and then, my student Kyle, who's one of our coaches now, and then multiple other students, Melissa, who I mentioned, she is also from this wilderness and awareness school tradition down in Duval. So they've brought a ton of their culture, a ton of their skills to it. So we do fire making, we do all these, we do tracking, we do gathering, we do, all this stuff. And all these games come out of the nature tradition as well. And so essentially through all these kind of exposures, you end up with this ecology of practices, as John Vervaeke had said, that didn't intentionally build as an ecology of practices. It evolved through the meeting of the type of people who wanted to do this thing. And then through applying the lens of theory that Jordan Peterson offers and John Vervaeke offers, start to recognize that essentially we're filling in the primary axes that give meaning to life. So there's in the psychological literature, they make a distinction between the meaning of life and the meaning in life, right? So the meaning of life is a religious question, right? Psychology doesn't try to answer that. But you can ask people, are they experiencing their life as meaningful? If you ask people that, then you can ask them, what makes your life feel meaningful? And essentially comes down to how connected people feel. A sense of connectedness appears to be the primary driver of meaning in life. So what we've discovered through these events is that fundamentally, we think there are 5 relationships that we can isolate out as giving a sense of meaning to life. So the first set of relationships is the relationships that are internal to you. So you can think of that as like how well your physical structure is coordinated, but it's also how well your emotion and physical structure and cognition are coordinated. It's how much you have awareness of physically what it's like to be angry, to be hungry, to be lustful, and then how sophisticated you are in managing those and the conflicts between those. So there's the internal and structural somatic element of it. Then there is the relationship you have to the physical world. And there's 2 kind of fundamental ways that we interact with the world: as a space we move through, and as a set of objects that we can manipulate. So again, exploratory locomotor and object oriented. And then there's the other living agents in the world, the other body minds, right? So how do we interact with the things? And so that's both, the self-defense aspect that Georges Chabert highlighted, but it's also dance. It's also shared work, right? It's also rituals, physical rituals. Mm-hmm. And then there is the relationship to something like the transcendent, this concept that we live within powers that are greater than us and that we are part of things that are far beyond our scope. So how do we put ourselves in a good relationship to that? How do we experience awe? How do we humble ourselves in the face of the great mystery of life, or, God, or whatever you want to call it? So if you can create greater depth and sophistication across all of those relationships and greater sense of connectedness, that's what's going to give meaning to life. And the fundamental claim within Evolve Move Play is the movement practice is actually the most powerful place to start, because it's the piece that integrates every aspect of you. And we as a culture have gotten that completely wrong. We have gone and thought that we can isolate the mind and just sit in the mind, right? Descartes, is this huge seminal figure in helping us understand doubt and the power of doubt and how to justify our truth claims and our epistemology. But he did this by this radically disembodied way, right? Mm-hmm. He said, I think, therefore I am. Like, that's the only thing, right? And he separated the body as, the world was viewed as automatic, as clockwork, as mechanical in this Cartesian worldview. And the mind was held as separate, as a piece of the divine. And the only justification that we have that we are real is that we experience consciousness. But the physical world is viewed as not conscious, as just matter. And so we've thought that we can understand philosophy and become wise by just juggling propositions, and we failed. We've thought that we can understand ethics by arguing about it on paper, and people who are ethics professors are not more ethical than other people. And at every level, we've failed to understand that this propositional understanding of knowledge that comes just through the mind doesn't actually make us better problem solvers in the world. Mm-hmm. And so we need a radical re-engagement with the body and with the world, the physical world. And it's within that I believe that we can actually redeem philosophy and maybe even religion, because we have to reunite them with the gymnasia, which is where it all started, right? Exactly. I told you earlier, right? The gymnasia. It's Plato's Academy. The academy was named before Plato, right? The academy was a gymnasia. It was a place where people met to engage in physical practice. And if you read the dialogues of Plato, most of them take place in gymnasia. That was where philosophy was born. It was born in the place that people were meeting for physical practice. Mm-hmm. But the story is even deeper. The gymnasia was built around a sacred grove of olive trees where the goddess Athena was worshipped. So in its origins, philosophy was united with a deep respect for nature and a sense that was where one should go to connect with the transcendent, and the idea that was somehow connected deeply to processes of communal engagement with physical training, with embodied training that grew us into the type of people who could, at that point, trust each other to stand in a shield wall. Mm-hmm. And that's where, our whole philosophical system originates. Yeah. So I believe that we cannot sort of embody the sage without returning to that full understanding of engagement with the natural world and with our body and with community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. That was That was such a beautiful curation of everything in there. I don't even want to step on that and add to it. That was just absolutely perfect in there. I named this podcast The Strength Connection because I've learned through so much personal experience, as well as being a coach, that it's the body, but it's the mind and the spirit. Everything's connected together. We can't separate these practices. It's like it's working these all together in one thing. It's not one is more important than the other one. They all have, part of the recipe to make this. What we're trying to do is be happy, be fulfilled, and be as strong as we can in our lives. And what you just said there, from not just the historical point, but the word that you kept, using there was reconnection. And that was one of my favorite things of seeing the work that you have, is there's a theme about reconnecting to what makes you human again.
Yeah.
And I think it's, for some reason, we get diluted into a lot of different distractions that pull us away from the source. And I've quoted this, before, from a good friend, Sifu Singh, who talked about flow state, and where he said, flow is natural. We just get in our own way. Mm-hmm. And it's a very similar approach of what you've done with Evolve, Move, Play, of just bringing everybody and returning back to the source. And from there, you're going to get what you need. It might be more physical, it might be more mental, it might be more spiritual, it might be a combination of all of them, but it's going to give you what you need in order to create where you need fulfillment most in your life. So I absolutely love all the work that you've done. I'm so excited to see the evolution of this and see where it continues to go down the line in the future for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if people want to connect with you more, check out more of what you're doing, see the retreats, what's the best place that we can direct them?
Yeah. Website's evolvemoveplay.com. Our retreats are sold out for this year. Folks can email us at support@evolvemoveplay.com to get on a wait list for next year. I think there's a wait list function on the website, actually. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can get on the wait list for next year. Mm-hmm. It's getting pretty competitive to get into the retreats, so people might want to get in on that. We have some workshops available. We have a couple more available in Asheville and in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. We're likely to open some new ones as well. We're looking at Los Angeles, Austin, Toronto, just kind of waiting on a few things to nail those down. But if folks are interested and want to see us in those cities or some other cities, support at Evolve Move Play to let us know. And then we also have a fairly extended group of online course resources that people can find on the website and check that out. I'm on Instagram. Mm-hmm. It's where a lot of our content is kind of hitting right now, and YouTube and Instagram. And then I dabble on Twitter and Facebook, but that's more.
And you have a podcast as well, right?
Yeah. That's probably something I should mention. I have over 100 episodes. We've had Frank Francich and Kelly Starrett and John Vervaeke and
Clifton Harsky.
Yeah. Cliff Harsky. That was a great one. So lots of really amazing guests, Callum Powell and Toby Seeger from Storer, Sebastian Foucault, one of the founders of Parkour. It's an amazing podcast, if I say so myself. And we are currently on hiatus with recording new podcast episodes, but there's a huge backlog, and we'll be back in the fall with new episodes of the podcast. So that's on YouTube, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Stitcher, I think. So wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can probably find it. Evolve Move Play.
Yeah, and we'll throw that in the link here. Rafe, thanks so much for taking the time. Listeners, thank you so much. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to these Strength Connection Mastery Seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait, go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.